We'll start the lesson off by talking about why you need conversion tools in the first place. Obviously, you can create brand new virtual machines, but why do you need to convert other virtual machines? Well, there's really a couple different scenarios here. The first one would be a P2V server conversion or physical to virtual. So let's say you have an existing physical server in your data center. You want to virtualize that. You would use a P2V conversion tool to do it. These tools make it much easier than, let's say, performing a backup of the physical host and then trying to restore that into a virtual machine. These conversion tools can make the process automated and easy. So there's one option, a physical to virtual. Another option would be a virtual to virtual server conversion. So in this case, let's say that you have another hypervisor in the data center. Perhaps a VMware vSphere host is running a virtual machine and you want to convert that to Hyper-V. You would use a V2V server conversion tool to convert that VMware vSphere virtual machine into Hyper-V. Or in other cases, let's say that you download a virtual machine from the internet that is created with another hypervisor. You might need to convert that to Hyper-V using a V2V server conversion tool. And in most cases, these types of tools are combined into one. So you get a conversion tool for Hyper-V, and it will do both physical to virtual as well as virtual to virtual server conversions. Fortunately, Microsoft and other vendors offer us a number of conversion tools to help us convert physical servers and virtual machines from other hypervisors into Microsoft Hyper-V. Let's take a look. Built into Hyper-V is what they call the virtual machine import feature. This allows you to import virtual machines that were created with another Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V host into your Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V host. However, it's not going to cover you in those other scenarios we just talked about. Another tool from Microsoft that will help in one of those scenarios, which is the V2V conversion or converting from vSphere to Hyper-V, is the free Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter or the MVMC. This is available from Microsoft.com, but there are some requirements. It has to have the virtual machine tools installed on it. They must be running, and it also must be joined to the Windows domain. So it is useful, but it does have some limitations. This is actually what the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter looks like. Here you can see that I found a number of virtual machines out there in my virtual infrastructure, but I'm only allowed to convert the ones that are actually powered on. You see there where the state is powered on. They have to be in the Windows Active Directory, and they have to have the VMware tools installed and running. Before I demonstrate for you the Microsoft conversion tools, let's first talk about some third-party conversion tools. There's a number of third-party conversion tools out there. One that I've used and have had good success with is the Five9 V2V Easy Converter. This is a free tool available from Five9.com, and it does do vSphere to Hyper-V conversion. They claim that they do it much faster than the Microsoft Virtual Machine Conversion Tool, or the MVMC. So in the demonstration, I'll show you first the Hyper-V Virtual Machine Import, then the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter, and finally the Five9 V2V Easy Converter. This way you'll have multiple options that you'll be familiar with as to how to move virtual machines from other hypervisors or even from other Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V hosts. So now it's time for our demonstration. First, I'll show you how to export a virtual machine and then import that virtual machine back into Hyper-V. Then I'll show you how to use the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter. So with that, let's get started. Here on our Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V host, to export a virtual machine, you can go to the virtual machine and right-click on it and go down to Export. Of course, you can also do that down here on the Actions menu. If you expand this out, you see here the option to export it between Move and Rename. Now, the big caveat here is that the virtual machine must be powered off. You cannot export a virtual machine that is currently running. If you go to the virtual machine and right-click and the virtual machine is powered on, the export option will not be there. So if you click Export, it'll ask where you'd like to export the virtual machine to. You simply give it a location on your hard drive, for example, the C drive, and then you click Export. It'll go through the process over here on the right-hand side. On the status, you'll see that it's exporting. It'll show you a percentage. It'll show you the progress until it gets to 100%. then say export complete, and then you'll have a group of folders and subsequent files in the location that you specified. For example, I just did an export of this virtual machine. It's actually a fairly large file, so I won't do it right now in this video training. But if we go to the C drive where I told it to place the folder, here you can see it created a folder for that virtual machine, which is the name of the virtual machine. If we go inside here, notice I've got virtual machines. I'll go in there, and here's this long string that represents the virtual machine configuration file. Then we've got virtual machine hard disk, and here's the virtual machine hard disk. Of course, these are going to be the largest files. This one is 8.9 gigabytes. And then if we go back one more, we've got snapshots. This virtual machine has snapshots. So these snapshots can actually take a fair amount of space. And all this has been exported to this folder. So if we wanted to import this virtual machine, back here in Hyper-V Manager, there's always the action up here on the host to import virtual machines. I'll click on that, and it says this is going to help us to import a virtual machine from a set of configuration files. So you can't just import a VHD or a VHDX, a virtual hard drive. You have to point the import virtual machine wizard to a configuration file. That configuration file is then going to reference the virtual hard drives and snapshots. So I'll say next here. We'll specify the location. The location is the C drive, and then the folder that it created for the name of the virtual machine. I'll click select folder here. We've got a path. I'll click next. It says that it found a virtual machine. It tells me when it was created. I'll click next here. And now we've got three options. The first option is to register the virtual machine in place. That means it's going to leave the virtual machine configuration files, hard drives, and snapshots where they are. It's not going to move them, and it's just going to register that virtual machine with this Hyper-V server. So the virtual machine will stay where it is. This is going to be by far the fastest option here, because it's just going to add it into this Hyper-V Manager. Of course, it says it's going to use the existing unique ID. However, this virtual machine was just exported from this Hyper-V host, so there could be a conflict here. In fact, let's try that. If we click Next, there we go. We get an ugly error because it says the operation failed due to the fact that the virtual machine, or a virtual machine with the same unique identifier, already exists. So because we exported this virtual machine from this host, we cannot import it back into this host. We could import the virtual machine into another host, but we cannot import it back into this host because that virtual machine already exists. We could restore the virtual machine, which still uses the same unique ID, but it's going to move the virtual machine hard drive and configuration files into the folder that this Hyper-V host stores its virtual machines in. Of course, we can't do that on this host again because we've already exported the virtual machine from this host, and it could cause a conflict of the unique IDs. So really the only option we have is to copy the virtual machine and create a brand new unique ID for this virtual machine. So I'm just going to click Next. We could choose to store the virtual machine files in different folders than what this Hyper-V host uses by default, but let's just take the default storage location. I'll click Next here. Now it's asking us where we'd like to store the imported virtual machine hard disk for this virtual machine. I'll take the default and say Next. And looks like we've got another error here. It tells us that this virtual machine hard disk already exists in that folder. That's because we're, again, importing it back to the same host that it was exported from. I'll click Close here. Let's go ahead and just change this to Hyper-V virtual hard disk dash imported. I'll click Next here. This time, no error. It gives us a summary of what it's about to do. I'll click Finish. And this will take a few minutes because, as you know, the virtual machine hard disk was about 9 gigs in size. So I'll be right back as soon as this is complete. Okay, we're back and the virtual machine import has completed. As you can see, we've got a brand new virtual machine here in our virtual machine inventory. To rename it, we can just change the name here. That's super easy to do. And we've effectively cloned that virtual machine by exporting it and then re-importing it and choosing to copy it and create a brand new unique virtual machine ID. So now we've got a duplicate Windows 2012 virtual machine running on this Hyper-V host. So that's how you export and import virtual machines in Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V. Now let's move on to the next topic in our demonstration, which is the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter. I've already downloaded the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter Solution Accelerator from this Microsoft web page. You can just go over to your favorite search engine and search for that, and you'll very quickly find this page. There's no registration required. You can go and download the tool directly from here. Notice that there's the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter Administration Guide, so you've got some documentation. There's the Virtual Machine Converter plugin for the VMware vSphere client. So this is actually, if you're using VMware vSphere already, you can use this plugin to convert virtual machines to Windows Server 2012 directly from the vSphere client. Then there's the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter Solution Accelerator, which is what I've actually downloaded and installed. This is a Windows application that runs directly on, let's say, this Windows 2012 Hyper-V host. It points to a VMware vCenter server or an ESX host and then allows you to convert virtual machines from there. And then you've got some release notes here. So like I said, I downloaded the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter Solution Accelerator. Here on the Start menu, it's called Virtual Machine Converter. I'll click on that. And this brings up a wizard here that walks us through the process of converting a virtual machine from VMware vSphere to Hyper-V. So it tells us here that one of the requirements is that the virtual machine has to be one of these operating systems: Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 2, 2008, 2008 R2, Windows 7, or Windows Vista. The virtual machine, I can tell you, also has to be a member of the Windows Active Directory, has to be available in DNS, and it also has to have the VMware tools loaded. So I'll click Next here. And now we need to provide connection information to our vCenter server or our ESXi host. My vCenter server is at this IP address here, and I'll type in the administrative password. The converter will go out there, connect to vCenter, and pull back an inventory. So through that vCenter server, it finds these virtual machines, and the ones that have the information logo here, says that this virtual machine doesn't have a DNS entry, or it's not powered on, or some other problem. The only virtual machine that doesn't have any problems, and in fact the one I'd like to demonstrate the conversion of here, is this Windows 7 virtual machine. It has a DNS entry, it's currently powered on, it uses 17 gigabytes of space. If we go over here, it uses 4 gigabytes of memory. It has 2 virtual CPUs, and there's the operating system, Microsoft Windows 7 32-bit. So we'll accept that virtual machine as the virtual machine we want to convert. And now we need to enter some information here about how we will connect to the virtual machine, what credentials we'll use. And then we need to specify the final state of the source and destination virtual machine. Do we want the source virtual machine to be on or off and the destination virtual machine to be on or off? I'm going to take the default here of off on both of those. I'll click Next here. Next, we select the location where we want the new virtual machine to be stored. I'll click Browse. Let's go ahead and put it in the same location as the other virtual machines that I've imported in the past. That's Users, Public, Public Documents, Hyper-V, and here's the virtual hard disk imported folder. I'll click Next here. We need to specify the name of the Hyper-V host. It'll be Hyper-V 1. I'll take the default to use my Windows user account, which is also the administrator on that host. Here we need to specify a path to store the converted hard disk. Right now it just defaults to the host name of the server. I'm actually on this server, so let's go ahead and make a share. I'll right click here on the C drive. I'll just do New Folder. Let's create a share called Hyper-V Converted. We'll right click on that. We'll share it. Share it for administrators with read-write permission. Okay, called Hyper-V Converted. There's our share. Let's go back here. Now let's browse. We'll put it in that folder. Say Next here. And here we get a final summary of the conversion. It gives us a warning about video memory, which isn't really important. We get to see what we're about to do. I'll click Finish. And now it says it's converting the virtual machine. It says it's creating a snapshot of the source virtual machine, preparing the virtual machine, validating the guest operating system. We note that this virtual machine's virtual disk is about 17 gigabytes, so we know that this process will take some time. So for that reason, I'm going to pause the video recording and I'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and we successfully used the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter to convert a virtual machine running in VMware vSphere to Hyper-V. You can see here it says the virtual machine was successfully converted. It tells us that we can now power on the virtual machine on the Hyper-V host, and they highly recommend that we install the integration services. So I'll click Close here, and let's go over to Hyper-V Manager. And here's the virtual machine that we have successfully imported. I'll right click on it and go ahead and click Start to power it on. We'll make sure that it works and that you can see the console. Let's go ahead and open up the virtual machine console here. Sure enough, there's Windows 7, just as it was running over on the ESXi host. There we go. We can log in, and there's the same desktop. I'm sure the same applications and data that I had over in VMware vSphere. So at this point, I demonstrated for you how to export and then import a virtual machine out of and then back into Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V. Then we downloaded the Microsoft solution for converting virtual machines from VMware vSphere to Hyper-V, and we actually converted a Windows 7 virtual machine using this solution, effectively performing a V2V or a virtual to virtual conversion. So that brings us to the end of the demonstration. Let's go back to our slides. And that concludes our lesson on virtual machine conversion with Hyper-V. Without a doubt, you'll be needing to convert some virtual machines from, let's say, physical servers or bring them from other Hyper-V hosts to get your new Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V virtual infrastructure up and running. Thanks for watching.